On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1958. We're going to be taking a look at Connie Francis, and she's going to be performing Who's Sorry Now? Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So we'll watch this performance the whole way through because it's only 2 minutes and 20 seconds in length, and there is quite an abrupt end to the video as well. So I'll jump in hopefully before the next video starts up. But let's jump into it and see how Connie gets on.
Crying too, just like I cried over you. Right to the end, just like a friend. I tried to warn you.
And there we have it. As always, the link to this video is going to be in the description below, so you guys can watch it as many times as you want to over and over again by clicking on that link. But this performance, but also just Connie's voice in general, was so unique, and the way that she applies vibrato, I'm going to dive into the analysis of the vibrato a little bit further on when I'm going to queue up some examples of what I'm talking about. But it just so happens that last night I did a video on K.D. Lang, and I was talking about the way that she uses the cry on her voice, and she was saying the word hallelujah yesterday, and I mentioned how on that word beginning with an H, it meant that her vocal cords were apart, and then just as they came together, there'd be the cry, which is just beyond vocal fry. So we go from air to vocal fry to cry to then connected, where you hear the note that's being sung. And it just happens to be the next night of analysis. But almost 50 years earlier than last night's video, we've got exactly the same thing. With Connie, every time she says that H, and it just so happens she's saying heart, but she's getting that cry in her voice. And I'll queue up a few examples as well. In that previous video, I did reference Patsy Cline because she was a huge influence on K.D. Lang. And you can check out that Patsy Cline video if you want to. I do get into a little bit more detail on the vocal fry as well as the cry and why I think we react to it the way that we do and why it is so emotive. But putting Connie's vocals under the spotlight here, I've queued it up because you want to listen to the H of heart. And the great thing about this is you'll be able to hear the cry pop out because there's a little bit more volume to it. But let's have a little listen to it and hopefully you'll be able to spot it. There we go. You can hear the H of heart isn't just a straight note, there's a cry before the note then comes in. Connie does occasionally throw in the cry subtly, in other words, just here or there, but I have cued it to another example because in the vocal phrase we're about to hear, the lyrics are, "But you had your way." And as you can hear, we've got the had, and the H there is where Connie's going to, again, apply the cry. So let's have another little listen.
But you had your way.
And there we have it. It's great to listen out to these little cries happening. When you are listening to this as an overall composition and performance, you're not going to take this in. It's because we're analyzing it and diving into it that you can now start to notice the emotion in the sound because of the way that Connie applies that cry to her voice. Another huge part of this performance is the dynamic range that Connie applies throughout the song, because she starts off with a very light approach vocally, and it's all in the head voice space. There's not a lot of leaning into chest voice. That happens in the second half of the song. And we have a little key change in there as well. And this is where Connie's vocals really do start to take off. She starts leaning into that sound, bringing those vocal cords together, even more pressure added, a little bit of compression in there. And by the end of the song, we've gone through a journey that is light and shade. The light at the beginning of the performance, literally with that light vocal cord connection. But then by the end of the song, she's really leaning into that chest voice. Another thing to look out for is the way that right at the end of the song, when she goes back to a lighter vocal cord coordination, she gets her hand and just turns it around. I've mentioned this about singers before, having mental imagery of their vocal cords being lighter. They're just touching their fingers together in order to simulate a light connection vocally between their chords. And that's exactly what Connie does here. It is so interesting to watch. The great thing is that you can see she actually emphasizes every word and every vocal cord connection with her hand as she sings it right at the end of the song. But look out for it. Let's have a look. And there we have it. And right at the end there, we had a slightly more connected sound in chest voice, and Connie lets her hands go and now puts them down by her side with open palms. It's now a sound that she's comfortable leaning into and isn't concentrating on that light configuration. Every singer's different, but you'll start to notice these little cues, the body language, the way that they are thinking of their vocal cords and how they achieve different sounds. Another thing I want to put under the spotlight is a technique that we've been talking about a lot recently, especially with singers from this era, where they slid from one note to the next. Connie does that as well. It is subtle, but we're just going to listen to the first two lines of the song and then we'll analyze them after. And there we have it. So on that first line, Connie hits the first two notes, who's so straight. There's no sliding between them. And then we've got who's sorry now. And there's a little slide up to now, that final note. And obviously I'm slowing it down, but when the second line comes in, she then slides twice. So then she goes, who's sorry now? So it's this really subtle slide, but it makes all the difference to the expression. And you'll find that throughout the performance, rather than jumping up to the next note like climbing stairs, she's singing the previous note when the next note would normally come in. So for example, in slow motion, if I'm singing, who's sorry now? I'm singing the previous note and just letting it go on again. Who's sorry now? So you're just singing that same note and then sliding. That is in super slow motion, but that's exactly what Connie's doing here. I've queued up another example of, this time, dynamic expression, and it's something that I refer to all the time about dynamics vocally and the great singers that have that dynamic range. Here, we're just going to listen to the word friend in this next vocal phrase and have a listen to it and see if it sounds any different to the rest of the vocal phrase.
Just like a friend.
Now see how Connie intentionally puts more emphasis on the word friend than the rest of the line. That is dynamic expression. It pops out because all of the other words, just like a friend, it's almost like jumping in your face. There's a little bit of attitude in there, a bit more emotion attributed to the word friend. And all of these things are going on throughout Connie's performance because she's just a top level singer and has all of that expression and control in there. I'm actually just going to let the video play on from where we just stopped it because I believe the next line is going to be a totally connected sound vocally in chest voice, whereas previously, as you heard, we had quite a lot of air in the sound, and then she just leaned in for friend, and now she continues leaning in for the next line.
I tried to warn you somehow.
There it is, fully connected the whole way through, and a really subtle cry on tried when she sang that word. It was just in there. Like I said before, there are little cries subtly throughout this whole performance. I think pretty much from about a minute and a half onwards, she really starts to open the taps in her chest register and lean into that sound. But when you're looking at a singer like this, there is so much that you can dive into in a performance that only lasted 2 minutes and 20 seconds. But the main thing that I want to draw your attention to here, that most certainly would have flown under all of your radars, is Connie's vibrato. The fact that she has a perfect semitone vibrato that goes above the note that she's singing. So we're going to be listening to the phrase just like a friend at normal speed to begin with, and then we're going to listen to it again at half speed. And you won't believe what Connie does with these notes within her vibrato because it is so well executed. But let's have a listen. So there we have it. I'm now going to rewind the video. We'll listen to it at half speed. And there we have it. Connie has a perfect semitone vibrato. She is touching the note above the note that she's singing with her vibrato and then coming back down again. So when she's going, she's touching two separate notes, but she's flowing from one to the next. And you don't notice that she's actually singing another note because she does it so well. It is such a smooth transition. If you slow it down like this, you can clearly hear the semitone change. But when she sings it at normal speed, you're not aware of it at all. The other thing is that when she starts the song, she starts out with a very subtle vibrato, and as the performance progresses, she then adds in varying degrees of severity with regards to the vibrato, where at the end, leaning into chest voice, she's now putting that vibrato much more up front. She's covering a wider pitch to this perfect semitone that we've just heard. An important thing to point out about this kind of vibrato that Connie is applying is that you need flexible vocal cords. They have to be supple. They have to be agile because you are hitting two separate notes really quickly and sliding from one to the next. So I'm sure that all of you are familiar with an exaggerated vibrato, a very classical sounding vibrato, which does go above the note, but it's slow. It isn't particularly agile or flexible. You can hear the waves quite clearly. And I've done examples before where I've gone, ah. It is like listening to Connie in slow motion with some classical singers. They have such a wide and slow vibrato, whereas Connie is utilizing that same technique, but she's speeding it up. She's got that vocal flexibility to not only increase the frequency of the vibrato, but to nail those two notes and just blend them together with the slides so seamlessly that you don't even notice it's going on. You just appreciate that voice that is singing to you. But I do want to get into Connie's history and career in this video as well. She was encouraged by her father to enter talent competitions because at a young age she started singing, also playing the accordion. And some of the talent contests that she did go in for were shown on TV, such as NBC's Star Time Kids. And this was between 1953 and 1955, which would have meant that Connie was about 16 years of age. She was rehearsing for an appearance on Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts, and he suggested that she should change her name to Connie Francis because she was Conchetta Francanero, and he just said it would be easier to pronounce Connie Francis, so she did that. And he also said that she should drop the accordion from her act, and she is more than happy to do that because she didn't particularly want it in her act anyway. So she took a job as a singer for demos, and these were for records that were just put around for different record labels and artists to listen to, and she would be the voice demonstrating the song that then they would record. In 1955, she recorded 4 songs, hoping to sell them to major record companies, and she did sign with MGM Records. And this was mostly due to the fact she had a song called Freddie, and one of the co-executives' sons was called Freddie. And he thought it would be a nice birthday present for his son, but unfortunately, commercially, it was a failure, and that was the case for the next 8 songs. She was hired to record vocals in 1956 for the movie Rock, 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 and this was for Tuesday Weld's singing parts in that movie, so that is Connie singing, and she was hired in 1957 for Jamboree, and this was singing Frida Holloway's parts. In 1957, she released The Majesty of Love, and this was her first taste of success. Like I said, she'd had 8 singles before that didn't do anything, and by the way, this was a duet with Marvin Rainwater. It got to number 93 in the charts. The problem was that the deal that Connie signed with MGM was for 10 singles, and one of those was a duet. So it means that she had 8 releases that didn't go anywhere. She had this one duet that started to go quite well, and she only had 1 song left, and then the label were going to drop her, and they made it quite clear that that was going to happen. So her father said that she should release as her last song on the label Who's Sorry Now? And Connie didn't like the song at all and was actually considering a career in medicine, to the point where she was offered a 4-year scholarship at New York University. Her dad believed that it would appeal to the younger generation and the older generation, so they recorded it and released it. And initially, it seemed to go unnoticed, but in 1958, it debuted on Dick Clark's American Bandstand, and it was featured a month after that as well. Connie then performed on the first episode of the Saturday Night Beach Nut Show, and this was also hosted by Dick Clark. So she was getting a lot of exposure for the song, and when it was released, it became a #1 hit in the UK. It got to #4 in the USA. It sold over 1 million copies, and Connie was now a worldwide sensation overnight. Just for reference, she was 21 years of age at this time, and in the video that we've just watched in 1958, and MGM renewed her contract, of course, and wanted a follow-up hit, so she released I'm Sorry I Made You Cry, and this got to number 36 in the charts. But then the next song, Heartaches, failed to chart at all, so it was going a little bit downhill. Neil Sedaka and Howard Greenfield were writing songs for her, and she didn't like a lot of the songs that they're writing, but they did write one that she did like, and that was called Stupid Cupid, and she released that. It went to number 1 here in the UK. It also got to number 14 in the USA, and this was really a momentum restorer because now she was back on track, so she regularly charted with future releases. And in 1959 she travelled to London, and this was her dad's idea to record an album in Italian, and she did in 1959. It was called Connie Francis Sings Italian Favourites, and this was a massively popular album. In fact, it's her most successful album. Mama got to number 8 in the USA, and it got to number 2 here in the UK. Entering into the 1960s, in 1960 she released Everybody's Somebody's Fool, and this was her first number 1 in the USA. She followed that up with My Heart Has a Mind of Its Own, and that was her second number 1. So she had a double header of number 1 hits. She also recorded in various languages other than English. I think there were 15 languages in total that she recorded in, and she was the most popular singer in Europe at this time as well. In the same year, 1960, she released Many Tears Ago, and that got to number 7 in the USA. So she was really flying high in 1960. Going into 1961 is when she released Where the Boys Are, and that was another monster hit. Got to number 4 in the charts, but also was then her signature song. This led to her first ever motion picture of the same name, and in 1962 she released Don't Break the Heart That Loves You, and this was another huge number 1. And that same year she released Vacation, and this was her final top 10 hit. And at this point we had the British invasion, which meant that a lot of artists and bands in the mid-60s fell by the wayside at that time. But Connie had crossover appeal, so she still was massively popular in the adult contemporary charts, and she was a top draw in terms of bringing in the crowds, playing concerts. She was massively popular, so she survived through that period with live shows as well. And in 1969 is when she allowed her contract to run out with MGM because she'd been recording and releasing for 15 years consistently, and she just wanted a little bit of a rest. Unfortunately, going into the 1970s, this was going to be a really trying time for Connie because in 1974 she was raped at a Howard Johnson's lodge, and she almost suffocated under the mattress with which she was pinned under. She sued the motel chain for lack of security and won $2.5 million, and she went into depression, understandably. She rarely left her house. And then in 1977, she underwent nasal surgery and she lost her voice. And she needed 3 more operations to get her voice back. And it meant that she couldn't sing for 4 years. But she did eventually return to the studio in the late 1970s. So getting out of the 70s into the 1980s now, in 1981, her brother was murdered by mafia hitmen. And she just returned to live performance, and she did find success, but it was short-lived. She was diagnosed with manic depression and was committed to multiple psychiatric hospitals. She did attempt suicide in 1984 as well, but somehow she kept going, and in 1989 she returned to recording and performing, and in 2004 she was headlining in Las Vegas. In 2007 she was playing sold-out shows at the Castro Theatre in San Francisco. In 2010 she was performing at the Las Vegas Hilton with Dionne Warwick, and in 2017 she released her autobiography, and that was called Among My Souvenirs. But it's great to have a look back at Connie here in 1958 with a short performance, but when you're looking at a vocalist of this quality at this level, you can take just a 2-minute 20 performance and break it down for years because there is so much in there to appreciate. But thank you guys for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!